So I want to say a couple things from the Go Get. Um, one is that one of the things I was told about, maybe just speaking in general, but certainly about giving Dharma talks, is that it's a good idea to speak from your um, scars, not your wounds. Um, and I'm going to say that um, I don't necessarily say wounds, but I'm going to be definitely speaking from my own process today. And so it's not sharing something that's all zipped up for me. Um, so I wouldn't say wounds, but I wouldn't say complete either. So please join me in this investigation. And I apologize to Choa. I didn't catch his talk last week. But I was present on Zoom for Jitsu Joe's, and I did listen to Fresh Lev's talk from last week. And I wanted to follow up on some themes from their talk. Um, Certainly, the, the talk about love, no self, and Sangha. And from Jitsu Joe, who's an old friend who I was just so totally beside myself with delight of getting to see her and listen to her talk, which was titled, at least afterwards, Dharma of the Queer. I loved her saying that we could all call ourselves they. And really, isn't that kind of the fundamental point of practice in a way? That we all are they. So what I wanted to share with you is as the kind of foundation of the talk, and then I'd really, really like to hear your reflections. So I'll try not to talk too long. I read an article in Tricycle, I guess in the beginning of the week. I'm very fond of Tricycle magazine because I happen to have had the opportunity to sit in Ongo with Helen Borkoff when she basically was just starting Tricycle magazine 30 years ago or something. So I've always appreciated the pan-Buddhist aspect and not being afraid to publish controversial things, which actually was included in this last issue. But this particular talk, or this particular article was by a guy named Winton Higgins. He's a insight, so he's a Vipassana teacher, but also kind of emphasizing sort of secular aspects of practice. And apparently his most recent book is called Revamp, Writings on Secular Buddhism. The title of the article, and you can look it up, it's in this current issue of Tricycle, is Treading the Path with Care. And he talks in the beginning about what he's saying. He's a scholar, I am not, but there's many scholars and many interpretations, but his is that that the Buddha's final weeks of life are recorded in the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, and that when he was old and sick, on his deathbeds, the last things he said were, which we study it as the 8 awarenesses of the enlightened person, that was his final teaching. And that's in one of my Zumi Roshi's books. But he says, surrounded by his closest followers on his deathbed, these were the things he said: things fall apart, and tread the path with care. So he spends a bunch of time kind of analyzing the word care, and different translators and how it's come to mean, from his perspective, a little bit more militant kind of diligence or rigor, or, almost from a monastic perspective. But he says, Stephen Batchelor, who's another, kind of very well-known writer, thinker about secular Buddhism, says that the best translation is care. So as opposed to diligence or vigilance or striving on untiringly. Probably all relate to that. Don't we do a lot of striving on untiringly? So what I wanted to talk about this is that is the subtitle of the article is, what happens when we ask ourselves, what do we care about most? And just because you're here, whether we're on Zoom or in the Zendo together, I would be willing to bet that what we care about most is this investigation about what is the fundamental nature of our life. And what is it, and how do we express it? And is that treading the path with care? And one of the, I actually, let's skip to this, because then it'll make the other things that I'm going to say make sense. So kind of later on in the article, and I know Jitsu Joe asked you to do this with a pen and paper, but that seemed awkward because those of you in the Zendo for sure don't have that right at hand. So he talks about the first thing the Buddha said, basically impermanence, right? Things fall apart, sometimes less fast than we wish them to, sometimes more fast than we wish them to, but it just is inevitable. One of the three Dharma seals, impermanence. So he doesn't spend a bunch of time on the things fall apart, because that's really self-evident. And to some extent, I think we practice functional denial on a daily basis, because we can't really function and enjoy our life at all. It's snowing now, with a constant perseveration about things falling apart. But it's kind of like they say in Native American tradition, or it's Carlos Castaneda that said that, right? Live with it on your left shoulder. Just that awareness, things fall apart. It's healthy for us to maintain an awareness that this doesn't go on forever. And that's also the fuel for treading the path with care. So when he gets towards the end of the article, he makes this statement, which is something that we don't tend to talk about very much, could be controversial. I'll see what you say about it afterwards. He says the whole point of meditation is to develop into this sort of authentic human being. As the Zen master Yamada Roshi put it, meditation is about the perfection of character. This is the controversial part, I think. It has nothing to do with training in some sort of technical skill or gaining crucial esoteric knowledge that cannot be attained in another way. Nor has it anything to do with transcending the human condition. I think I'd be curious about the translation of the perfection of character. I think maybe it would be more helpful for us to look at it as the cultivation of character. So why would that be related to meditation? So we talk about in Zen that it's like the two hands. I don't know if it's generally in Buddhism because I don't know much generally about Buddhism. Really, I only know some bare amount about Zen. Is that wisdom and compassion are like our two hands. When we see deeply into the nature of reality and the fundamental connection, then, so let's say that's wisdom. Compassion naturally arises. How could it not? How could it not when we feel our insubstantial and inexhaustible connection to everything? And fundamentally ungraspable, fundamentally impermanent, non-specific. Seems like that was a word Maezumi Roshi would use. So my feeling in reading this is not to get hung up on the perfection of character. That's just more of the same. That's more of the same. That's more of the same shame and guilt that we can tend to run ourselves with. But how about trusting that this basic thing that we do of settling into being whole and complete as we are actually cultivates character, because it becomes a choiceless thing. So there's this little activity at the end, and I wanted to do it with you because I wanted to make some comments about it. So I'm taking a page from Jitsu Joe's, whatever. So he suggests that we give some consideration. So I'm going to invite you to give some consideration for the moment. Oh, and I see that Barry has joined. So I just want to acknowledge Barry is here, and he's also a member of the Idlewild Community Zen group. So thank you for being here, Barry. So just for a moment, you can close your eyes or not close your eyes. And just notice what just organically arises when I ask the question, what do I care about above all else? What do I care about above all else? And try not to mediate it through judgment, just organically what comes up. But let it sink. Almost don't believe the first thing. So get a little bit into your hara. What do I really care about most? And you could do some writing about it later, contemplation, or forget about it. It doesn't interest you. So that's the first question. And the second question is, given the way I'm living right now, what exactly am I giving priority to in my life? Given the way that I'm living right now, what am I giving priority to in my life? And again, it doesn't have to be, it's not an essay. It's just what organically rises. And again, with a healthy dose of friendliness. It's the very last thing he says. Dharma practice is an ethical path that leads into that gap between aspiration and habit. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Is there a gap? What's the gap between what matters to me most and what am I prioritizing right now? And some of that is just going to be functional, right? We have to do things maybe that keep us busy. But what I value most is being able to really settle down and pay attention to the things that are most important to me. So I'm going to ask you to just set that aside for a minute and maybe come back to it. And I have this article in a PDF, so I'll send it to Chilla and he can send it out in case you're curious to investigate it further. And this is the part that's speaking from my process and not my completion. So the three things that came up for me was to live with as much integrity as possible, to grow in my capacity to love and be loved, and to make a meaningful difference in the world. And what I want to talk about is a part about integrity. And I actually write, thank goodness I thought to do this when we were in the break, that there's two definitions, and the second one is amazing. The quality of being, so integrity, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, moral uprightness. I think that's our sort of normal way of looking at integrity. And the second one was the state of being whole and undivided. We talked about that. I guess I talked about that in my last talk about my Maizumi Roshi saying, never forget undivided mind and self-fulfilled samadhi. So the state of being whole and undivided, for me around integrity, that was such a huge relief, because it's not some pinnacle of perfection and some absolute of right and wrong about how I'm supposed to live my life. And we know that from our precept study, that it's not just one way or the other. But it's so hard to remember that we are in process of cultivating character. And it's not something, this is about treading our path with care, not the Buddhist path, not some idea of something happened 2,000 years ago. Treading this path right now with care. And fucking up. And being friendly to ourselves about that. And when I thought about this through the week, what could help me to have the strength to, like I said, those three things that I at least initially, what came up is what I value most. And struggling with being in integrity. What I thought about was taking refuge. You know, we say it's part of Jukai and part of taking the precepts, and I think it's part of all Buddhist practice. I've done it in the Tibetan tradition as well. Taking refuge. And it's like if you imagine you're on a windy path. You're up on the divide between Idlewild and the desert, and it's super windy, it's cold, it's kind of narrow. And we are challenged. I'm challenged. What can I hook my carabiner to? And it just struck me that take refuge, take that, get into step back into the cave, like not a cave, but like the conch shell that the Mother Mary is in. Step back into this intention, this vow to live what we value most. So feeling sort of bandied about and not necessarily trusting myself to act with integrity. But it's like, can I stay in the refuge of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, stay in the refuge of, I will trust myself to do my best. And I'll mess up. But I'm still going to take refuge in that intention, in that vow. Which doesn't feel like a rule. Mm-hmm. So obviously that takes a certain level of courage. And I had heard this before, but I did look it up, that the root word of courage is cor in Latin, which is the Latin word for heart. So it's not about from here necessarily. It's from here. And the courage, one of the Diana Winston added a fourth aspect to mindful self-compassion, which is trusting in basic goodness. So if we can extend that friendliness towards ourselves and trust, and it's not even your, our, just like we say in Verse of the Kesa, the field of benefaction. We can trust in that. Then we tread the path with care. And we bring our whole self and our whole heart to it. And it doesn't matter when we miss. I don't know who that said. It might be attributed to Suzuki Roshi. I have no idea. But, being a Zen master is making one's mistake after another. And that's only because, I guess if you're a Zen master, you're just aware of your mistakes one after another. Sometimes we're not. So I just really wanted to credit, and I apologize also for not being at the workshop yesterday. I had a different obligation, but I wanted to, really thank Fresh Lev for bringing up. I think he said in the very beginning of his talk, it's all about love. And I went to this class that was being taught by this philosopher recently because it was the title of it was something, so you think you know something about love. I was really curious. I was excited to go to the class. I didn't find him to be particularly interesting lecturer, but he talked about that there's three kinds of love from a like philosophical perspective. Romantic love, which is in his definition very associated with sexuality, and platonic love, which just defined as friendship, and agape, so which I think is sort of classically understood as the love of God, unconditional love. And he kept talking about these three things as these sort of like separate entities. I got really frustrated because there's no separation. And, obviously, so there's boundaries and appropriate separation. That's part of integrity, right? It's part of the precepts. There is a precept around not misusing sexuality. Which can be viewed in a lot of different ways. But so what do we even mean when we use this word love? But I tend to think that fresh love and what we're talking about here is unconditional regard for the whole damn thing. Unconditional appreciation. And to the extent with the three pillars, faith, doubt, and determination, to the extent that we can put some faith into that we really are whole and complete as we are. And not, as my Cindy Roshi would say, not as you think you are, not how you look at yourself conventionally. But the love then is unboundless gratitude for that, just that. So just coming back to that title, this is our invitation to tread the path, our path, with care, and bring our whole heart and our whole mind and our whole messed up self to it. To see what you get back.